A fateful rainy night in Edgeville. The town of Edgeville, nestled deep in the green, rolling countryside of southern Kansas, was the kind of place where people felt safe leaving their doors unlocked. Where the worst crime folks remembered was Mrs. Hurley's missing pie from the county fair. Known for its fertile cotton fields and sleepy two-lane roads, Edgeville had barely changed in 50 years. At the far edge of town, past a thicket of cottonwoods and a muddy tributary, sat the modest clapboard home of Dan and Linda Miller, a hard-working couple who had made their living for decades, buying and selling cotton from local farms. On the evening of May 4th, 2019, a heavy sheet of rain swept across the plains, turning dirt roads into instant swamps and drawing a curtain of drizzle across porch lights and barn gables. It was the kind of rain that made even the dogs curl up and sleep deeper. The Millers, like most everyone else, shut their windows, made a simple supper of roast chicken and boiled vegetables, and turned in early, oblivious to the lurking shadow just outside their fence line. Across the way, Pete Larson tossed in bed. His wife Mindy snored quietly beside him, but Pete found himself replaying the details of his conversation with Dan earlier that day. They'd agreed to meet by sunrise to haul a shipment of cotton bales south before the market opened. Dan had joked about not wanting to miss the worm, and Pete, dependable as always, set his alarm for before dawn. That night, the rattle of rain against the window and the distant crash of thunder kept sleep from coming. He worried about the dirt roads, about how quickly they could become impassable after a Kansas storm. What Pete didn't know, as he lay in the darkness, watching red digits tick on the bedroom clock, was that somewhere out in the storm, a figure was moving with purpose. The man, draped head to toe in dark rain gear, boots caked with mud, had spent hours staking out the Miller's house earlier in the week. He knew their habits, what time they locked up, how often Dan took out the garbage when their daughter called from Wichita. Most importantly, he'd watched through the tall grass one afternoon as Dan accepted a thick wad of cash from a farmhand, the proceeds of an unusually large cotton sale. This, the stranger determined grimly, was his chance. Just after 2 a.m., with the rain now falling in cold, slanted sheets, the intruder made his move. There were no streetlights out this far, only the weak glow of the Miller's kitchen bulb, barely visible under the overhang. The man stepped quietly off the road, crossed the soggy patch of yard, his rubber boots leaving near-invisible prints in the churned muck, and sized up the house. Years spent working odd jobs, hauling and loading, had given him a certain confidence with locks and fences. He knew the Miller place had no burglar alarm, no nosy neighbors right next door, no dog, just the two of them, inside. With a practiced hand, he slipped a screwdriver from his jacket and jimmied the back window, one that Linda always left just a little cracked for airflow. The tool slid in, the catch released with a soft click, and he was in. Silence inside, except for the rhythmic sound of rain against tin. He paused, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness, heart pounding, but hands steady. From the faint yellow puddle of the living room lamp, he could see the outline of the kitchen, and beyond that, the bedroom hallway. 10 steps in, he caught the potent smell of gas. The Miller's gas stove was old and finicky. For a fleeting moment, the man wondered if he should abort, but the temptation was too great, the plan too well set. He moved down the carpet runner, avoiding the one creaking floorboard he'd noted on his earlier surveillance. In the bedroom, Dan Miller stirred, half wakened by the sound of a floorboard flexing, but sleep overcame him again. Linda's phone buzzed silently on the nightstand, a calendar reminder for her daughter's birthday in 2 days. The rain pounded harder. In the kitchen, the would-be thief fished for valuables in the drawers, pocketing some spare cash, a silver watch, and a gold necklace left by the sink. The bigger prize, he knew, was likely hidden elsewhere. He crept down the hallway, boot prints glistening in the faint light. When his eyes fell on the Mills' bedroom, door cracked, the couple's sleepy murmurs barely audible. A new plan formed. He gripped a length of steel piping he'd found in their shed earlier. Makeshift, brutal, effective. The first blow was swift and silent. Dan barely had time to gasp. Linda woke only as the attacker pivoted toward her, grasping for the table lamp, but he was too quick. Both fell back onto the bed, silent but for the small gurgle of rainwater along the gutters. It was over in less than a minute. Outside, thunder rolled and the wind rattled the tired window frames. The intruder wiped his brow, breathing hard. He felt the strange, sickening adrenaline that always hit him at moments like this, victory and terror colliding in his veins. He rummaged through drawers, tossing linens aside, until he found what he'd come for. The envelope thick with hundreds, the gold earrings and wedding band Linda had tucked in a sock drawer. Before he left, he returned to the kitchen, grabbed a chunk of cold chicken from the counter, and wolfed it down with shaking hands. His appetite not shaken, but if anything, heightened by the violence. He poured a glass of water, drank deeply, left the glass on the table. On impulse, he reached behind the stove, turned the gas on full blast, thinking that one errant spark would erase any trace. By the time Pete Larson awoke to his alarm and the dreary gray wash of daybreak, the stranger was gone, out the window, through the mud, vanishing beyond the cotton fields. Pete, still groggy, pulled on his rubber boots and raincoat, shuffling out under, the metal awning to glimpse Dan's driveway. No sign of Dan or his work truck at 7 a.m. It wasn't like his friend to be late. Pete gave it another 10 minutes, sipping burnt coffee, before his worry took over. He crossed the waterlogged yard, clutching his jacket tighter against the morning chill, and pushed open the Miller's rickety garden gate. The first thing Pete noticed was the front door, not shut, but merely pulled to, the lock catching on nothing. He called out, voice booming in the dim foyer, but nothing answered him. Stepping inside, he was hit by a pungent, unfamiliar smell, a chemical sting, the kind that makes the hairs on your neck stand up. He moved quickly from room to room, his boots clicking on the old linoleum, until he reached the Miller's bedroom. What he saw would haunt him forever. Dan and Linda, motionless, crimson drying on the cotton sheets, the familiar room now a scene out of a nightmare. Pete stumbled back, choking on the gas, desperate for air and for sense. He scrambled for the window, tore it open, and ran back outside, shouting for help. Within the hour, Edgeville was transformed. Sirens pierced the gentle drone of the rain. Blue and red lights flashed along the main road. Neighbors huddled in bathrobes on porches, whispering in disbelief. Officers fanned out, asking questions, taking photographs, marking footprints that for now seemed destined to wash away. The little house at the edge of Edgeville, once a symbol of small-town safety, had become in a single night the epicenter of a crime too shocking for its gentle citizens to imagine. And somewhere, far from the scene, a man in muddy boots drove on through the last drops of the storm, certain he had gotten away clean, unaware that a single greasy glass left by the sink would soon draw the sharp, unblinking eye of justice. The police mobilize. First clues at dawn. The night's violence had barely faded from memory when Edgeville's police chief, Mark Quinn, finished buttoning his rain-soaked uniform and stepped out into the clammy Kansas dawn. The radio in his squad car crackled with voices from dispatch. The scene was already drawing in every available unit from Elmdale County Sheriff's Office, and word was that state crime scene investigators were heading in from Topeka. When Chief Quinn arrived at the Miller house, emergency lights painted the puddles red and blue. Onlookers, neighbors, a few persistent local reporters, stood behind yellow caution tape. Paramedics had finished checking the victims, confirming the worst. Quinn's stomach twisted as he ducked beneath the tape and entered through the open front door. Detective Ruth Morales, his trusted second-in-command, was waiting near the threshold, her eyes bloodshot behind fogged glasses. "It's bad, Mark. Real bad," she whispered, guiding him inside. "No signs of forced entry at the front, but the window in the laundry's been jimmied. We have graphic trauma. Gas was on, but no fire. And you won't believe what we found in the kitchen." Chief Quinn's boots squeaked across the linoleum. Mingling with the smell of wet earth was the undeniable chemical stink of natural gas. He kept a handkerchief pressed to his mouth as Morales led him toward the kitchen. On the countertop, next to a battered bread box, sat a plate holding the mutilated remains of last night's roast chicken, next to a greasy glass, still bearing the outline of a lip print and a streak of fat. Quinn raised an eyebrow. "He ate." Morales nodded grimly. "Looks like he wasn't in a hurry. Took his time." They moved into the narrow hallway, where more officers were snapping photos and dusting for prints with little clouds of black powder. The bedroom was almost untouched, except for the violence wrought. Drawers yanked, linen scattered, but nothing valuable left in sight. A crime scene technician pointed to a muddy boot print near the closet. "These don't match the family's shoes. Deep tread, size 11 or 12. The perpetrator likely came prepared for the storm." Quinn took in the scene with methodical calm, developed from decades on the force. He noticed the lack of disorder elsewhere. No broken glass, no overturned chairs. The intruder had moved with caution and control. The only real mess was in the drawers and closet, where clothing and keepsakes spilled out in a desperate search for cash or valuables. In the far corner, just beneath a toppled stack of linens, Morales crouched. "Found something," she called. Carefully, she lifted a length of steel pipe, stained and sticky at the tip. On its side, black grease mingled with brownish red. They both understood what that meant. Morales bagged the weapon, tagging it for forensics. Patrolman Jeffers, green but sharp-eyed, flagged them from the back door. "There's more," he said, leading Quinn to the laundry where the window's latch had been forced, splinters scarring the frame. "We got mud here, too. Looks like he slipped, maybe. And I found prints. Partial, with what looks like calluses. Could be our guy's gloves are thin, or he worked with his hands a lot." Outside, forensics combed the flower beds and muddy yard. Rain continued to patter down, turning dirt into soup and complicating evidence recovery. A shoe impression was visible beneath the bedroom window, a big blocky print. The CSIs photographed it from every angle, then pressed dental stone around its edges to create a mold before the next downpour could erase it for good. By the time the sun was up, they had collected samples of bunched-up bedsheet fibers, hair, and the smear of blood on the pipe. Meanwhile, Morales corralled the neighborhood. She started canvassing for anyone who'd seen or heard anything. Most were still half asleep, faces drawn, and voices anxious. "No one saw a single thing," she reported back to Quinn. "But listen to this. You know Pete Larson? He says, the dog next door barked around 2 a.m., then went quiet. That's the closest thing to a timeline we have." Quinn jotted it all down. "Rain can carry noise, stifle it, or even amplify it the wrong way. But we'll take any lead. Let's talk to local shelter staff, see if anybody's been buying heavy boots or rain gear. And get me a list of recent parolees, anyone with a violent history." The evidence began trickling in. Preliminary fingerprint results from the glass and the pipe. Close-up shots of disturbed mud beneath the window, smears of grease on the back doorknob. Though partial, the prints on the kitchen glass didn't match either Miller or any known local, suggesting an outsider with no record in the town database. The cast of the shoe, a tread like something off a construction site or a road crew, hinted at a suspect who spent time outdoors, someone used to bad weather and hard work. A lull settled over the scene as morning wore on. The county coroner, Dr. Evelyn Grant, arrived, her SUV fishtailing in the slick clay. With practiced empathy, she worked through the bedroom, noting time of death, the brutal efficiency of the attack, and the total absence of defensive wounds. "The victims never woke up," she said softly to Quinn. "They were hit before they could even see their attacker. Whoever he was, he planned this." Throughout the day, deputies moved up and down Cottonwood Lane and out into the back roads, their tires kicking up rooster tails of brown water. They flagged down every pickup that passed, questioned every farmhand and delivery driver. Morales scanned lists of known drifters, vagrants spotted near the depot, anyone who might have an axe to grind or could pick a lock. Then came the first real break. A neighbor, Mrs. Bertie Jenkins, remembered seeing a lone figure walking along the dirt road just after midnight, carrying a bulky bag and moving quickly. "He had a strange walk," she recounted, eyes wide behind thick glasses. "Stooped, like he was used to hauling something heavy." Quinn and Morales charted a list of known transient workers, cotton packers, mechanics, odd jobbers, who might fit the figure. They coordinated with the Elmdale County Crime Lab, sending off samples of everything: the pipe, the glass, the muddied linens. Faxes rolled in from the state database, promising full DNA and fingerprint comparison against every recent parolee and registered violent offender in Kansas. As the sun dipped behind thunder-laden clouds, Quinn gathered his team in the shadowy living room of the Miller house. Photos from the day's work lined one corkboard, shoe prints and fiber samples pinned with care. "This isn't just a home invasion," he told them gravely. "We're dealing with someone who's done this before, or at the very least thought this through for a long time." He wasn't surprised by the rain, and he seemed to know where to look. "Let's dig hard into anyone with a record, working crops, and check county pawn shop logs for anyone trying to offload jewelry or cash, especially in the last 48 hours. For Morales, the case was personal, a brutal intrusion upon the sleepy routines of her town. She stared long at the greasy lip print on the glass and the battered pipe in the evidence bag. "He left these for us to find," she mused, "like he didn't care if we came after him or he wanted us to." Out in the street, the rain slowed to a gray whisper. The townsfolk huddled indoors, phones clutched, spiking low about things that should not happen in places like Edgeville. Yet the gathered police held tight to their notepads and cameras, piecing together every odd detail, every stray print and broken lock, already aware, perhaps, that this was just the first step in uncovering a darkness that had shadowed the cotton fields for years. The victim list grows. A killer hunts Edgeville's rainy nights. As the initial shock from the Miller murders slowly bled through Edgeville's community, Chief Quinn, Morales, and their team turned to analyze the evidence harvested from the scene. It was Morales' sleepless persistence that first planted the suspicion. This wasn't some desperate, spur-of-the-moment crime. This felt practiced, even methodical. One crime analyst from the county remarked quietly, "This is the kind of thing you hear about in big cities. A pattern, maybe even a repeat offender." Edgeville's old-timers shook their heads, but rumors spread faster than the spring mud from tractor tires. Standing in the cluttered small-town police station in the days after the attack, Morales traced the web of clues on the big whiteboard: muddy boot prints, a vanishing assailant, a family devastated, and then something else. Reports from other nearby counties, files about similar crimes, archived in yellowing folders, were dragged from the back room and laid across the desk. Each folder charted an eerily familiar narrative. The first was a case from Hayes Creek, a farming town 40 miles to the north. The circumstances sent a chill down the spine of every investigator. A couple home alone on a stormy night. A forced entry through a window. The couple found bludgeoned in bed. The home ransacked, cash and valuables missing. The police in Hayes Creek were stymied then. The storm that night had washed away shoe prints, smudged fingerprint powders. No one saw anything, and the case went cold. "This isn't just Edgeville," Morales muttered grimly to Quinn. "He's been out there, circling these old farm roads for years." Quinn nodded, flipping through the next file. "Here's another. Claytonville, 2015. Same damn MO night of a heavy rain. Farmhouse just outside town. Owners left dead, attacked in their bed, while the radio played thunderstorm warnings. Police chalked it up to a burglary gone wrong back then, but the violence, the randomness. It's starting to look a lot less random. Now, the more they dug, the more cases surfaced. The Codford double homicide of 2012, when a widower and his adult son were found beaten to death in their small living room. The rain coming down so hard that neighbors' porch lights were reduced to halos in the mist. Or the unexplained tragedy at Parker's Crossing, not a year later. A farmhand, home alone while his family was at church, had been killed by blows to the head, his muddy boots found beside the back door. Each crime brought with it the same notes in overworked police handwriting: forced entry during a storm, minimal struggle, all valuables gone, the victims hit while they slept. The location spanned 3 counties and nearly a decade. Quinn's team mapped out the crime scenes and timelines, and a grim pattern emerged. All the targets were rural homes with either no dogs, no security, or families known locally to keep cash from their farm trade close at hand, rather than trusting banks. The attacks all happened when the roads were degraded by rain, when getting to the scene fast, or receiving outside help, would be nearly impossible. What if he knows these people? Morales wondered aloud one late night, eyes blurry. Or at least, how they live, their routines. He either grew up here, or watches these communities closer than we think. Edgeville PD called an emergency meeting, looping in state and county law enforcement officials. The rain, once barely noticed, except as a nuisance for local farmers, had become a sinister calling card. The department pulled up weather reports and crime logs, looking for matching patterns: home invasions on nights when thunderstorms rumbled over the prairie. "We've maybe got a serial," said FBI liaison Eric Raymond, summoned down from Kansas City. Older, with salt and pepper hair and a bone-deep weariness, Raymond outlined how serial offenders select vulnerable targets, slipping in and out with the cover of darkness and bad weather. "This guy relies on the rain. It muddies the footprints, muffles the sound, keeps everyone indoors. These aren't random killings. He's hunting." To locked-in families across the region, the details sank in with terror and disbelief. At the Miller's funeral, whispers circled through every pew. Who might be next? Which house? Which lonely road? Which family quietly saving up for their next season's seed? Word spread to small papers and regional news channels, who sent fresh-faced reporters to nose around Edgeville's muddy lanes, asking sharp questions and taking note of the sunken faces around every farmhouse window. But Chief Quinn knew that fear alone wouldn't solve these crimes. He doubled down, interviewing itinerant workers, questioning those who worked seasonally at multiple farms, and systematically reviewing lists of parolees and newcomers in each affected county. Morales chased clues about the mysterious boot prints. Could they source that size and type of sole? Was there a limited number of local supply stores where such boots were sold? Did anyone recall a stranger buying gas or groceries during a stormy night, looking like trouble? Back at headquarters, a grim gallery began to form. A victim board, their photos and details tacked up with red string weaving between them. A father and his young daughter in Codyville, whose only mistake was trusting their old dog not to bark in a downpour. 2 elderly sisters in Davenham, whose retirement meant they always kept rolls of cash hidden in their sewing room. With every face, every new folder, the killer's shadow loomed longer and darker. The press labeled the unknown attacker the Rainy Night Reaper, a moniker Chief Quinn hated for its tabloid flair. Still, it stuck. "Rainy Night Reaper strikes again," blared one local headline after a fresh, unsolved break-in turned up 3 counties west. Quinn struggled to reassure the public. Town meetings grew heated. Folks demanded patrols, spotlights, and neighborhood watches. But for all the police presence, bad weather and darkness still blanketed the prairie, offering anonymity to anyone determined and patient enough to wait. Meanwhile, forensic analysis moved urgently. DNA from the Miller's kitchen glass, matched against state and federal databases, produced no hits. Prints were run through every system. Crime lab reports compared mud samples, plant fragments clinging to boots and pants at crime scenes, even the smallest details of construction on the duct tape found at Hayes Creek. Each clue felt like a thread, but the fabric of answers held together mostly by luck and dogged persistence. Late one evening, Morales sorted through weeks of interview transcripts and discovered a pattern in the timing. The attacks all fell during the first harvests, when farm cash flowed fastest and laborers moved across the region. She put a call out to every farm owner in a 50-mile radius. If you've hired anyone new, if you've seen a drifter around your machinery or workers you can't vouch for, call us, even if you're just uneasy. And still, the killer waited. Somewhere, as fresh rain battered the roads outside Edgeville, a man hunched in a dim-lit motel, turning a battered duffel bag over on his lap, considering his next move. He was confident, after so many years unseen, but the net was finally starting to close. Inside the police station, the victim list grew, but so did the determination of Quinn and his team. The hunt for Edgeville's killer was now in full swing. And this time, the storm would not wash all the footprints away. Beyond grudges, chasing the stranger's trail. As the weeks ticked by and the victim count rose, Chief Quinn and Detective Morales knew they'd reached a turning point. The pattern was simply too clear, too focused, to chalk these murders up to bad luck or simmering family feuds. They set aside all notions of personal vendettas, soured business deals, disputed farmland boundaries, deep-seated rivalries. The darkness lurking over Edgeville and the surrounding towns felt colder and more calculating than anything local motives could conjure. Morales led the charge in a stuffy conference room at Edgeville PD headquarters. Under flickering fluorescent lights, she laid out a far-reaching theory. We're not looking for a killer with a grudge against a single person, or even a single family. This is someone who knows the rhythms of rural living. He's picking people with cash, not quarrels. Our guy is focused, opportunistic, and almost invisible. Her statement prompted a new kind of grunt work. The detectives were no longer just fact-finding for each case. They were drawing lines as far as they could toward anyone who might know how these families lived. Someone who blended in when need be, kept to himself, and left barely a ripple wherever he stayed. Shifting the investigation, the first step. Building a portrait of the killer. Morales and Quinn started with geographic profiling, plotting all known crime scenes and searching for natural corridors, highways, back roads, bus stations, labor pools. Was there any overlap in the victims' recent activities? Had they hired new workers, or attended the same auction, mercantile, or bar? What routes would an outsider take, moving from town to town during those signature rainstorms? Questions piled up as fast as the files. Officers fanned out to talk to farmhands, wandering mechanics, and the drifters who sometimes gathered under the overpasses when bad weather kept them from hitchhiking onward. Patrol cars circled near isolated motels and rest stops, collecting names and license plates. In these interviews, Morales didn't mention the murders at first, just asked about work, about travel, about anyone passing through who seemed out of place, especially during the last few months. Sometimes people let slip the smallest details. A guy who never tipped his cap indoors, a stranger asking about which farms were flush with cotton this spring, or someone observed eating alone in a diner on a stormy night. Among the names, one, Lonnie, stuck out. Never a last name, just a handle. He was burly, not unfriendly, but kept his answers short. He said little about himself, but seemed to always know whose property was going up for sale, where the road crews were pouring new gravel, or when the cotton gins were busiest. Always wore old rubber boots, even at the bar, noted one bartender. Didn't much like to talk, just drank his beer and watched the rain. Morales began to see a pattern. The suspect wasn't choosing places at random. He picked areas just after the yearly harvest, when farm incomes were at their peak. Each time, he waited for a big weather front, counting on muddy roads and thunder to muffle any noise or slow down law enforcement. Dismantling the local motive theory. Meanwhile, community pressure threatened to swamp the investigation. Family friends, even former rivals of the victims, swore up and down that there were no outstanding debts, lawsuits, or unresolved grudges. Old-timers chimed in at town meetings, recounting minor quarrels from years past, but as Quinn methodically checked each one, every personal theory fizzled. Some even brought up folklore, the ghost of the old highwayman, who a century ago robbed farmsteads by lantern light. Quinn shut that down quick. No ghost leaves boot prints and eats the chicken. Diverting local suspicion was almost as tricky as tracking the actual killer. Morales worked with sheriff's deputies and county social workers, making sure that no one took the law into their own hands or started a witch hunt for random strangers. "Whoever this is," she said in each interview, "he's watched us all very closely. He plans, he waits, and he slips away." Expanding their reach, Quinn, meanwhile, pulled in help from the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. They cross-referenced shifts in seasonal labor, especially among cotton pickers, construction workers, and railroad maintenance crews. He personally contacted regional parole officers, asking for lists of men released in the last 10 years who had histories of theft or violence and who might have drifted between sparsely populated towns. Technology, too, played a role. While the killer avoided most digital footprints, one sharp-eyed, nerdy officer named Jessica downloaded security footage from gas stations and agricultural supply stores within a 50-mile radius of the murders. She compiled a spreadsheet. Muddy boots, black raincoats, men paying cash for canned food, or a new pair of work gloves just before major storms hit. Most were dead ends, but in 3 separate rainy night purchases across 3 towns, the same tall, dark-haired man appeared. Never looking at the camera, always alone. The first real lead. By late June, the uneasy coalition of police and townsfolk had built a basic profile. He was a seasonal worker, age 35 to 50, fit and silent, comfortable in a farm town, but clearly an outsider. He chose older homes without security systems, often seeking jobs on local crews weeks beforehand as reconnaissance. One farm owner remembered, too late, that a temporary hand had asked an unusual number of questions about where extra cash was stored, just in case of emergencies. Piecing these insights together, Quinn and Morales zeroed in on the string of identities used by their suspect. Aliases strung out in social security numbers, cheap motel ledgers, and the half-remembered conversations of late-night bartenders and early-morning bus drivers. Real progress came when a motel clerk in Carver Springs, some 40 miles south, called in a tip. "I know that guy you've got the sketch of. He was here last week, stayed 2 nights, paid cash, used the name John Beale. Left behind a muddy print by the vending machine. You want the Coke bottle he tossed? It's still in the trash. I haven't done cleanup yet." Cautiously hopeful, Morales and a crime tech swooped in, collected the Coke bottle, and dusted for fingerprints. The lab confirmed. It matched one partial found in the miller's kitchen. A break, finally, and one that pointed squarely for the first time at a stranger who had walked among them all along. A new phase begins. By then, the atmosphere around Edgeville had shifted from panicked grief to a kind of grim resolve. The killer was no longer a shadow, no longer some mythic avenger born of local rumor. He was flesh and blood, clever, and shockingly mobile. Quinn didn't say it aloud, but everyone could sense it. With every careful interview and shared piece of evidence, the circle was tightening. The stranger's trail had stopped being just muddy footprints outside a bedroom window. It was now a map of mistakes, purchase receipts, hurried lies, and, most importantly, DNA, fingerprints, and 1,000 pairs of eyes, who for the first time knew what sort of evil to watch for. Rain still fell, but the man who once hunted families across the dark prairie was suddenly the hunted. Every storm brought the hope that soon he'd run out of places to hide. A cross-state crime spree. The trail of the silent phantom. As the task force painstakingly reconstructed the stranger's path, an unsettling realization took shape. This killer's reach extended far beyond Edgeville's sleepy fields. The familiar pattern, storm-swept nights, rural homes, brutal surprise, surfaced again and again, painting a blood-soaked line across the heartland. Morales mapped each incident, drawing a looping, restless circuit that defied borders and stumped even the most experienced cops. The first major break came in late June, after the Coke bottle from Carver Springs produced a strong fingerprint hit. Detective Morales, hunched over her laptop late at night, ran the match not just through Kansas state records, but the entire National Fingerprint Database, AFIS. Her heart raced as the computer churned, ticked, then landed on a red-highlighted list of cases from Oklahoma, Missouri, and even eastern Colorado. Each report was disturbingly similar. In May of 2013, outside Enid, Oklahoma, a farming couple was found murdered on a night when tornado warnings fluttered through radio static. A neighbor reported seeing a muddy, solitary figure slipping into the darkness, but the rain erased tracks and spattered away blood. In 2016, near Springfield, Missouri, a single mother, owner of a thriving farmer's market stall, was discovered dead after a late-night storm. Entry through a bathroom window, blunt force trauma. The only clue, a broken, mud-streaked boot print on linoleum. Smaller-scale thefts and arsons, usually targets known for keeping cash at home, filled in the gaps. Victims always local, always hard-working, always caught in the hush of a Midwest summer downpour. This is a pattern, not just a spree, Agent Eric Raymond concluded to the group. We're looking at a subject who's methodical, mobile, and, for most of a decade, careful enough to slip between jurisdictions. Each time the storm comes, he moves. If we want to catch him, we have to think like he does. We need to ask, why these particular nights? What is he watching for before he strikes? Chief Quinn studied the new evidence boards ringed with maps and case files. Each attack occurred when a confluence of factors came together. Harvest season payouts, a lack of local law enforcement, nearby motels or labor camps, and most critically, bad weather. Rain wasn't just happenstance, it was cover, both for sound and for evidence. He didn't just choose victims at random, he stalked them, learning their habits and vulnerabilities as he migrated between jobs, towns, and even states. Nowhere, however, did the killer leave a digital trail. He paid cash, always. He used burner cell phones, if at all. Motels remembered first names, Tom, Joe, Bill, never a matching surname, never the same twice in a row. He drove borrowed or stolen vehicles, rarely staying longer than a few days in any one place. That's what makes him invisible, Morales told the team during a heated evening meeting, rain hammering the station's leaky windows for punctuation. We're not chasing a local with a grudge or a desperate thief. This is a professional transient, someone who's lived hard, knows how to blend, and stays in the shadows. She paused, then flipped through the growing file of victim profiles. There's another pattern here too. He chooses targets on the outer edges, single women, elderly couples, immigrants just starting their farms. He's calculated. He goes after people most likely to be isolated and least able to defend themselves. With every day, media coverage intensified. Local and national reporters gave the killer a new moniker, the Silent Phantom, a murderer who traveled by storm, a haunting figure the news anchors compared to urban legends like the Zodiac or the original Night Stalker. In rural communities across the lower Midwest, farmhouses bristled with motion lights, shotgun sales spiked at every feed store, and parents reminded their children never to answer a knock after sunset. The rural-urban divide made investigations harder. Edgeville's officers were used to trouble with farmhands or town drunks, but now they coordinated daily with out-of-state detectives, sometimes in person, sometimes by secure line or late-night video call. At the center of it all was Morales, her desk stacked with manila folders, coffee rings, and interagency memos. A crucial link surfaced when Jessica, the tech-savvy rookie, analyzed a string of purchases in 3 states: rain gear, boots, gloves, all from mom-and-pop supply outlets. Surveillance videos rarely caught much, but over weeks she detected a recurring silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with purpose, never lingering before paying in cash and vanishing into the storm-soaked parking lots. Around the same time, DNA results began to trickle in from Edgeville's latest crime scene, the greasy glass, the Coke bottle. While no direct matches turned up in national databases, the partial profile flagged something big, a close familial match with a low-level offender arrested years ago in rural Oklahoma. Digging deeper, Morales uncovered a string of aliases, several tentative last-known addresses, and a birth date that placed the suspect around 40 years old. More telling, the suspect had a checkered work history with seasonal agricultural contractors that supplied labor across the region. He kept no fixed residence, instead traveling with the harvest, a ghost who survived off-the-books work and rarely left anything behind but muddy prints and shattered lives. Motor pools and train yards now became hunting grounds for investigators. Undercover officers, dressed as day laborers or fuel attendants, quietly asked around, "Did anyone remember a man named Rick or Jack drifting through after last week's thunderstorms?" Motel managers scanned guest books for repeat handwriting, noting the unfamiliar names that arrived with the rain and always checked out before sunrise. By mid-July, the growing task force, now backed by state police and the FBI, launched a coordinated regional sweep. They flagged every suspicious cash purchase of work gear, every vagrant report matching the composite sketches, and every pawnshop sale tied to rural jewelry. The flurry of collaboration yielded some leads. Witnesses in Oklahoma recalled a man trying to pawn a gold locket belonging to a local murder victim, but the suspect was always gone before questions grew pointed. Yet even as they closed in, the Silent Phantom seemed to sense the pressure. Incidents slowed. Suddenly, there were no storm night break-ins. Motel sightings dried up. A summer drought gripped the region, keeping the fields, and, it seemed, the killer, unusually quiet. Still, Quinn and Morales refused to ease up. Morales pored over work and travel records, comparing rosters of agricultural crews with the timeline of every crime. Interviews with farm bosses finally put together a partial work circuit: summer in Kansas, fall in Missouri, spring in Oklahoma, the same farms hit with thefts, the same rainy night absences logged in their supervisors' books. The task force knew the storm wasn't really over, just waiting to break again. They ramped up pressure, set up stings, and showed the suspect's updated sketch in media broadcasts from Topeka to Tulsa. The next time clouds gathered over any crossroads farmhouse, they swore someone would be watching for the ghost in the rain. Unbeknownst to them, the Phantom was watching too. But for the first time in years, it wasn't with the confidence of a predator. It was with the wary alertness of prey. The breakthrough. Biological evidence and the boiled chicken glass. After months of muddy boots, shadowy tips, and dead ends, the investigation teetered on exhaustion. The Silent Phantom's trail had grown colder with the summer drought, and both local and federal officers found themselves retracing old leads night after night, combing through blurry security footage and stacks of pawn shop tickets. Morale dipped. Even Morales, typically razor-focused, slouched at her desk, plagued by nightmares of empty farmhouses and rain-soaked crime scenes. But every case has its hinge, the moment the lock gives and the door swings open. For the Edgeville task force, that moment arrived with an almost absurd bit of luck and a tenacious cop's eye for detail. An undercover operation. It started not with a criminal mastermind slip, but a hunch from Officer Tyler Smith. Smith, a good old Kansas farm boy himself, had noticed similarities in seasonal labor patterns and turned up in Carver Springs, working undercover at a busy cotton gin. Tall, broad-shouldered, and unassuming, he blended right in with a few dozen day laborers recruited from halfway houses and city shelters. But Smith wasn't just there for the overtime or a break from paperwork. He was watching for a specific type of drifter, the kind who traveled light, worked hard, and disappeared at the first hint of trouble. After 2 long weeks under cover of a muggy July afternoon, Smith found his mark. The man who called himself Joe Carter matched the most recent composite sketch. Quiet, fit for his age, careful to pay cash every Friday, never drinking with the crew, never staying long enough to make friends. Like clockwork, he left the gin for an isolated trailer outside town, always in old rubber boots, rain or shine. Smith befriended Carter with small talk, mostly about the work, the weather, and grumbling over the food in the break room. After a rainstorm shut operations for half a day, a cluster of workers gathered in the canteen, eating boiled chicken and potato salad beneath a wheezing fluorescent light. Carter joined them for the first time, barely speaking and keeping to the edge of the group. When he finished his meal, Carter left his glass on the table, a careless detail, the kind an experienced fugitive shouldn't miss. Smith's pulse quickened. He unobtrusively slipped the glass into a plastic sandwich bag, scrawled the date and time on a napkin, and finished his own lunch. He drove straight to Morales and the task force, the evidence sealed tight beneath his truck seat. The science of the hunt. At the county crime lab, the mood shifted from tired routine to anxious anticipation. Technicians swabbed the rim of the glass, careful not to contaminate what could be the first pure DNA sample ever linked to the Phantom. Morales and Quinn waited anxiously as Dr. Felix Tran, the senior biotechnologist, ran multiple tests: STR profiling, mitochondrial markers, and a final cross-check with the preserved evidence from the Miller crime scene. Time slowed in those fluorescent-lit halls. The team clustered in the lab, flicking through faded folders, each person calculating what this evidence could mean. Would it be another dead end, like that partial print in Codford, or the muddy sweatshirt found in Hayes Creek? Had the killer simply gotten lucky with rain and dust again? But the test results returned with stunning clarity. A perfect DNA match. The genetic fingerprint from the Miller house's greasy chicken glass matched the sample from Carter's abandoned lunchware. There was no statistical doubt. The odds of random coincidence were virtually zero. Morales, normally reserved, grinned widely for the first time in months. "We got him," she whispered, clutching the lab report so hard that her knuckles whitened. "This is it. This is the hinge." Closing in task force members fanned out, putting discreet surveillance on Carter's trailer. With warrants in hand, they searched his small, cluttered space. Rain gear, an assortment of steel tools, and a battered duffel bag stashed under the floorboards. Inside, they discovered what they had only dared speculate about: envelopes thick with cash, jewelry engraved with initials from Clay County and Parker's Crossing, and a stack of pawn shop receipts from 3 different states. Most damning of all, stuffed deep in the duffel, were 2 pairs of mud-caked rubber boots, still bearing the unique tread that matched casts retrieved from several rain-soaked crime scenes. Fingerprints dusted from the boot heels, the steel pipe found in Edgeville, and the glass from the Miller kitchen all led back to one man. With the science lined up and the physical evidence stacked high, Carter, or whatever his real name was, found himself the centerpiece of a multi-state indictment. Morales and Quinn watched as the pieces fit. The travel patterns, the work records, the pawned items, the unremarkable man moving quietly between storms. They marveled at how much of the case had rested on psychology as much as forensics, a killer who studied others, but who'd never stopped believing in his own invisibility. The moment of reckoning. Carter was arrested without incident. He sat at the kitchen table in his trailer, hands spread flat, the old farmer's dignity still in his shoulders, but no fight in his eyes. The search team read out the evidence list as he stared at a faded photograph on the fridge. 2 strangers, a wheat field, sky heavy with the promise of rain. For a moment, he looked every inch the tired laborer he pretended to be, before his features hardened, and he stared through Morales like she was a window smeared by a storm. Word spread quickly, both through official briefings and back-channel gossip. Edgeville's cafe regulars fell silent as the news reached them. The phantom had a name, or at least a face. Quinn stood on the courthouse steps as cameras flashed, giving a statement that managed to be both a victory cry and a warning, reminding everyone just how vulnerable their lives had been, and how fragile their sense of safety remained. In the crime lab, under flickering lights, the boiled chicken glass and the duffel boots were tagged and photographed. They became objects of quiet celebration and deep relief, relics of a decade-long hunt that had finally ended, not with a bang, but with careful science and patient police work. Morales let herself smile, for perhaps the first uninterrupted minute in years, before turning back to her notes to begin the work of prosecution. For Edgeville, summer thunder still rolled across the plains, but this time, when the rain came, it carried not the promise of fear, but the strange, cleansing power of a storm run its course, and the story at last of justice keeping vigil beneath the big open sky. Confession before justice. Nightmare's end. The moment. Carter was confronted with the mountain of evidence. The man who had haunted prairie nights for over a decade seemed to shrink in his seat. Gone was the hardened expression he wore in mugshots and at the end of dusty bar counters. In the sterile, humming interview room, he fidgeted, eyes darting between Morales and the silent tape recorder. For a long minute, all anyone could hear was the distant Kansas thunder pressing against glass. Detective Morales, face clouded but steady, slid the key items across the table, a hazy photograph, the battered steel pipe, and the glass that had started it all. "We know who you are," she said, voice even. "It's time you told us what you've never told anyone." For the first time, Carter's shoulders sagged. Then, with the same deliberate slowness with which he once stalked the dark cotton fields, he began to talk. A childhood shaped by shadows. Carter's confession painted a memory-streaked portrait of growing up in rural poverty. He described moving from place to place, his parents picking up odd farm work, always one step ahead of the debt collectors. He learned to break into sheds before he learned to write. In these towns, nobody stuck around long enough for friends. Suspicion and hunger made the strongest companions. "I used to look at them, these families with their Sunday shirts and warm houses like they'd been born lucky." The bitterness grew with the years. Carter explained how envy turned to anger, especially during storms when the only thing that moved on the roads was muddy water. Nobody would notice a stranger then. Over time, he learned how to watch for payday patterns, to slip into communities when the skies promised a long rain. He picked families he thought wouldn't miss their loss until morning, those who'd done well on harvest, the ones with cash stashed in coffee cans and sock drawers, the making of a phantom. According to Carter, his first crime was almost an accident, spur-of-the-moment break-in to dodge the weather. It worked, and the ease of it gnawed at his resolve. After that, every successful job built his confidence. He started traveling state to state, wearing new names as easily as he wore his old farmhand jackets, always careful to work just hard enough to be invisible. The weather, he said, felt like an accomplice. Rain would clean up after me. With each act, his methods became more violent, the violence easier. When you do something enough times, it stops feeling like you at all, he muttered, eyes low. What disturbed detectives wasn't just the number of crimes, but the detail with which Carter remembered them. The names blurred, but the weather always clear in his memory, the sensation of silence after the act, the nerve-tingling thrill and the crash that followed. It wasn't greed, he insisted, so much as compulsion. The cash became less important than the act of getting away with it. Sometimes he ate whatever was in the fridge, a leftover drumstick, a half-burnt biscuit, just to prove he could. He believed foolishly that if he left fewer traces, the storm would always erase his guilt. Teetering on the edge of remorse. Throughout his confession, Carter drifted between a cold self-justification and fleeting flashes of regret. In one breath, he dismissed his victims as strangers, collateral lost to the meanness of the world. In the next, he'd describe a nightmare where rain hammered his window, and the faces of those he'd hurt floated up from the dark. There were nights I woke up and thought I heard that dog barking, even in a motel 100 miles away. Rain makes everything sound the same, he admitted quietly. Under gentle but unwavering questioning, Carter described the final, fatal night in Edgeville. He remembered the feel of the wet grass, the hiss of gas in the miller's kitchen, the adrenaline spike as he moved through their home. He claimed it all played out fast, impersonal, the violence almost automatic. I didn't think about what would happen to them after. The town, the way people would look over their shoulders. It was just about getting away and making sure the storm would take the rest. Courtroom reckoning. Carter's confession, matched with the evidence, sealed the case against him. News of his arrest and the details of his crimes reverberated across Kansas and beyond, unsettling rural communities that had long believed themselves secure. In the courtroom, Carter was reserved, never quite meeting anyone's gaze. Survivor testimonies and victim impact statements painted a landscape of wounds that would never fully heal, a legacy of suspicion, sadness, and ruined nights when the wind blew hard and windows rattled. The prosecution sought and readily won the death penalty. The jury saw Carter not as a tragic drifter or romantic outlaw, but as a chilling reminder of what can happen when rage simmers into resolve and finds cover in the very elements meant to nurture life. Morales sat through the sentencing, hands folded tight, finally able to let herself grieve for the Millers and all the others. Her community finally given an answer, no matter how unbearably dark. The final storm breaks. In the end, Carter made no dramatic speeches. When granted the right to address the court before his sentencing, he simply cleared his throat and said, "No storm lasts forever. Sometimes you just hope you're not standing where the water rises." Back in Edgeville, and in a dozen towns that had once lived with their doors unlocked, life resumed. Changed, but not broken. Alarm systems sold out in a week. People still watched the rain, but now with a wariness that would take generations to wash away. For Morales, justice didn't bring back the dead, but it gave the living the chance to reclaim their peace. In her final report, she wrote, "This nightmare ended not in thunder, but in quiet persistence, the way any storm eventually yields to the dawn." As Carter's story faded from headlines to legal archives, the cotton fields greened once more, and the people of Edgeville took comfort in the simple, ordinary rituals of community. It wasn't triumph exactly, but it was at last the end of an evil story, and the chance for new, softer ones to begin under the now watched, now cleansed Kansas sky.